What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. So much to get to, from the midweek action to what is happening at Chelsea. I'm going to cover all of it, but there's really only one place to start, and that is what happened in El Clasico, the fifth of the season. Real Madrid 4, Barcelona 0. And I'm going to try and kind of make two simultaneous arguments that admittedly don't 100% mesh with each other. But you're going to see where I'm going with this because they can both be true. This was much more about Barcelona than Real Madrid. And this game highlighted the shortcomings Barcelona still have. Specifically at the center back position. And yes, Andreas Christensen wasn't there. That's why you need to have more than 2 or 3 center backs you trust, one of whom plays, well, actually, 2 of whom play right back some of the time. And Araujo just basically plays right back. He could play center back. The point is they don't have enough center backs they can trust. And so Marcos Alonso gets to start over Eric Garcia. Marcos Alonso is not a center back. I've been having this conversation since Frank Lampard was playing him at left back and a back four. He's not a center back. He's not a left back. He's a left wing back. Putting him at center back highlights all of his weaknesses and doesn't let you capitalize on any of his strengths. I have never understood how he became a center back. And the defensive vulnerabilities have always been there, and you saw it time after time in this game. On the best chance Real Madrid had before the goal, on the first goal, he gave it away again that I think didn't turn into a goal, but was almost a goal in the second half, and then he got hooked after 65 minutes or whatever it was. He had a nightmare. And it's not shocking because he's not supposed to be starting for Barcelona at center back in this game. And then you also had, I believe it was Frank Kessié who gave away the penalty that basically finished off the game, in a spot where he had absolutely no reason to do that. These were self-inflicted wounds, more so than they were Real Madrid being absolutely brilliant. This was not that 30 minutes of absolute majesty that you've seen in the Champions League time and time again, where they overturn these aggregate deficits and they're just breathtaking for a half or for 30 minutes or whatever it takes to find a way to come back and win. That wasn't this. They were good. Certainly the better team. But Barcelona were comfortable in that first half, and then you had one moment where they hit them on the counter, and then Barcelona just collapsed in the second half. And so here are the 2 points I was talking about earlier. It is still 100% fair to wonder whether this Barcelona team coming into next season, assuming they're in the Champions League with all the stuff going on off the field right now, but assuming they're playing in the Champions League with something close to this roster, this squad, whether they can actually be considered a contender. And not in the definition of, yeah, I could see them winning it, as in one of the 5 or so teams you really feel like you wouldn't be surprised if they won. One of, not necessarily the clear-cut favorites, but kind of that second tier of the other teams. If I told you the obvious picks weren't going to win, who else would you be looking at? Because this is the problem they've had for most of the season. They go up against the best teams, and they don't perform well. Now, the flip side to that is I will still take the consistent team all day long. And that's why I said these two, they don't go together, but they can both be true. Barcelona still has a long way to go, and I still want to praise the team that shows up every week and does what they're supposed to in one of the best leagues in the world. Excuse me, sorry about that. Because, especially this season, nobody else is showing up week after week, except for Napoli and Arsenal. And there was a moment where he wondered if Arsenal were going to. But they ultimately pulled it back together. Those three teams have shown up. But you look across the board at, PSG right now. You look at Bayern. I'm not going to destroy Barcelona, who have, by the way, beaten Real Madrid 3 times already, for this and make it some bigger commentary. They're the best team in the league. They're better than Real Madrid. They have the part 1 figured out, which is how to go take care of business in La Liga, which is something that Real Madrid has not done, something that plenty of other teams that you put on Barcelona's level are not doing this season. And so I still have them in the, top 5 in my rankings. I believe right now they're number 2. That's going to change this week after this debacle. But they're still going to be in the top 5. They're still going to be somewhere close to Manchester City. Why? Because they show up every week. If you put them on the field and ask me which team I'm taking if I have to win a game, of course I'm taking Manchester City. But that's why the game's not played on paper. This Barcelona team has been really, really good all season. I will continue to say they're not getting the credit they deserve, because they performed poorly and got bad draws in Europe. They would still be in the Europa League if they weren't playing Manchester United. But this game highlighted how far they still have to go. Because when you don't have your preferred 11 available, which is going to happen, when you don't have a good game, they have the ability to implode like this. What they've done is they've just been more consistent than everybody else. And I will always put a lot of value on that. It's the difference between whether I like their chances in La Liga or like their chances in the Champions League. I have a hard time buying into their Champions League stock next season unless this kind of stuff stops happening, because they simply don't have the depth, especially the center back position, to navigate this. And you saw that in this game. On the Real Madrid side, this was a big deal. To avoid losing 4 times to Barcelona, to avoid another embarrassing loss with a trophy potentially on the line, in a tournament where you can win a trophy, after already losing 1 final, after already more or less throwing away any chance you had at getting back into the La Liga title race. They showed up. And before we get into the Real Madrid knockout magic thing, that applies against elite opposition in the Champions League, and if you want to throw this kind of game in there too, then fine. But don't be putting the Copa del Rey in there with the Champions League. Go look at Real Madrid's recent history in this competition, which is also a reason why this is so important. They rise to the occasion when they're playing teams on their level. It's not a knockout thing. Part of it is they know how to navigate that, but it's more the combination of knockout and elite opposition, because they've been bad in this tournament, this competition. And yet here they are with a terrific chance to win it, a terrific chance to come away with a trophy, which is something that probably wouldn't happen otherwise this season. Now, yes, they could win the Champions League, of course. But you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. And does it salvage the overall season? No. And I'll be the first person to criticize Real Madrid this year. I've never been high on them. I still have this frustration that too much stock gets put in Champions League in terms of how good that team really is. If you're ranking, of course, if you're asking who's going to win the Champions League, it's a different conversation. Same thing, we just had the NCAA tournaments. I make this comparison all the time. I might pick a different team to win a regular season conference title or to win a league than I am to win a Champions League or an NCAA tournament. Takes a different set of skills, whatever word you want to use. So they get the season series to 3-2. They get a really dominant performance here. They get to the Copa del Rey final, and they do close the gap a little bit between these two teams in terms of the perception. Because the Champions League by itself will not do that. Of course, it helps if you win the thing. But it doesn't make up for the fact that they just haven't been competitive in La Liga this season. At least to me. But now it comes across a little bit more even. So now if you're okay, Barcelona ran away with the league, but Real Madrid, made it to the semifinals of the Champions League or something, won the Copa del Rey. Now we're talking a little bit differently. And this does help Carlo Ancelotti too, although we'll have that conversation if he decides to leave. To me, you're asking for trouble if you were going to show him the door. Now, if he wants the Brazil job, then by all means. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But I'm not convinced you're going to get something better. So this helps in that perception too. But at the end of the day, to me, this is more about Barcelona than Real Madrid. It's about the questions that are still there, while also not needing to overreact and no need to rewrite the narrative on this season. They are flawed. And a bunch of other teams this season are too. They have shown up better than just about anybody else week in and week out, and you've got to give them credit for that. Sometimes this kind of stuff happens because they're not player for player at the point where they're matching the best teams in the world. They still have a ways to go to get back to being a top, I can't say top 5 because I haven't been in my top 5, but to be one of the favorites to win the Champions League. That is how I will put it. They still got a way to go. This game was an example of that.